She handed me a list of rules the first time I tried to hold my own grandson. I still remember standing in the doorway of their house in Oakville, a stuffed bear tucked under my arm, and my daughter-in-law Vanessa sliding a laminated sheet of paper across the kitchen counter toward me like I was signing a lease. No unannounced visits. No bringing food without prior approval. No discussing family finances with my son. No taking Noah anywhere without written consent 48 hours in advance. I read it twice. Then I looked up at her and smiled. Because what else do you do when the woman your son married hands you a document to govern how you love your grandchild? Just so we're all on the same page, she said. My son Michael was standing near the back of the kitchen, looking at his shoes. That was 3 years ago. Noah was 3 then, and the bear I brought him that day is probably in a donation box somewhere. I never did see him play with it. My name is Walter Brandt. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years working as a civil engineer for the city of Hamilton, and I retired when my wife, Diane, got sick. Diane passed 4 years ago, pancreatic cancer, 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. She was the kind of woman who remembered every birthday in the extended family, who kept a handwritten recipe box going back to her own mother, who once drove 2 hours in a January snowstorm to bring soup to a neighbor she barely knew. She loved Michael fiercely and unconditionally. She adored Noah from the moment she first held him, 2 weeks before her diagnosis. She used to say that Noah was the universe's way of giving her something beautiful to look at on the way out. After she died, I thought the hardest part was going to be the silence in the house. I was wrong. The hardest part was realizing that the family I thought I had was slowly being managed away from me, one laminated rule at a time. It started before Diane even passed. Vanessa and Michael had been married for 5 years at that point, and things had always been a little stiff between Vanessa and me, but I'd put it down to personality differences. She was organized, particular, private. I respected that. I gave them space. I didn't drop by unannounced, didn't offer opinions on their choices, didn't interfere. When they bought their house in Oakville, a 4-bedroom semi on a quiet crescent, I gave them $60,000 as a gift. The bulk of what remained from a small inheritance my father had left me. I didn't attach conditions to it. I didn't ask for anything back. It was family money, and they were family. What I didn't know was that $60,000, in Vanessa's mind, wasn't a gift. It was a transaction. And somewhere along the way, she had assigned me a value, calculated what I was worth to her household, and was quietly running the numbers. After Diane died, I tried to be present without being intrusive. I'd call ahead. I'd keep visits to once a week, Sunday afternoons, 2 or 3 hours. I'd bring Noah little things, a book, a puzzle, a chocolate bar from the shop near my house in Hamilton. It felt like the most natural thing in the world, watching him grow. He had Diane's eyes, this serious gray-blue that turned greener in the summer, and he asked questions constantly, the way children do when they're discovering that the world is enormous and full of things nobody has explained yet. But every few months, something shifted. The Sunday visits got shorter. The 48-hour notice requirement got added. Then I was asked not to park in the driveway because it bothered the neighbors. Then I was told not to bring food anymore because Noah had dietary sensitivities that I wasn't qualified to navigate. Then one Sunday I arrived and Vanessa told me at the door that it wasn't a good time, that Noah was tired, and I drove an hour each way to stand on a porch for 4 minutes. I mentioned it to Michael the next time we talked on the phone. She just wants things to run smoothly, he said. You know how she is. I did know how she was. What I was beginning to understand was that Michael had stopped distinguishing between what Vanessa wanted and what was right. The rule sheet arrived in my inbox about 8 months after Diane passed. It was a formal document, printed on actual letterhead. Vanessa had apparently drafted it herself, outlining the terms of my involvement in Noah's life. Visiting hours. Saturday afternoons only, 2-hour maximum. Gifts required pre-approval. No discussion of financial matters. No photographs shared on social media without written consent. No overnight visits without a minimum of 30 days' notice. At the bottom, there was a line I had to sign. I didn't sign it. I called Michael and asked if we could talk in person. He said he'd been meaning to call me too. We met for coffee at a Tim Hortons, halfway between Hamilton and Oakville neutral ground, which I suppose tells you everything about where things had gone, and he sat across from me with the look of a man who has been coached on exactly what to say. Vanessa feels like the boundaries haven't been respected, he told me. I asked him which boundaries. I had followed every rule she'd given me. I had called ahead, kept my distance, swallowed every instinct I had to just be a grandfather. He talked for a while about Vanessa's need for structure, about how the visits were stressful for Noah, a claim that puzzled me, since Noah always ran to the door when I arrived. I let him finish. Then I asked him, directly, "Do you want me involved in Noah's life?" He said yes. He said, of course. But there is always a but. The but, it turned out, was that Vanessa had a new proposal. If I wanted to maintain regular access to Noah, she felt it was reasonable for me to contribute to Noah's expenses. Not a gift. Not when I felt like it. A standing monthly contribution of $800, transferred directly to an account she controlled, as a condition of continued access to my grandson. She calls it a family support arrangement, Michael said, not quite meeting my eyes. I looked at my coffee. I looked at him. He was 41 years old, and he was sitting across from a Tim Hortons table, explaining to his father that seeing his grandchild would now cost $800 a month. I said I needed some time to think. He nodded like that was a perfectly reasonable response to a perfectly reasonable request. I drove home in the kind of quiet that isn't peaceful. It's the quiet of a man who is trying very hard not to say something he can't take back. I didn't sleep well that night. I sat at the kitchen table where Diane and I used to have our morning coffee, and I thought about Noah's gray-blue eyes, and the way he said Grandpa Walter, with the emphasis on the Walter, like my name was the most interesting word he knew. I thought about Diane saying the universe had given him to us as a gift on the way out. I thought about $60,000 going into a house that now had a sign-in sheet for family visits. And then I thought about a conversation I'd had, about 6 months earlier, with my neighbor Patricia, whose son had gone through a difficult divorce. She'd mentioned a lawyer, a family law attorney in Hamilton, named Reginald Forsyth, someone Patricia described as patient and precise, and not the kind of man who gets loud when things get complicated. I'd taken his card to be polite. It was still in the drawer, with the takeout menus and the spare keys. I took it out that night. I called Reginald Forsyth the next morning. His assistant put me through within the hour, and I spent 45 minutes on the phone, explaining the situation as clearly and calmly as I could. Reginald listened, without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Mr. Brandt, I want you to do a few things before we talk next. I want you to save every email, every text, every document Vanessa has sent you. I want you to write down, with dates, every visit that was canceled or restricted, and I want you to have a conversation with your accountant about the $60,000. I asked him why the accountant. Because, he said, gifts given to family members are not always treated the same way under family law, depending on how they were given and documented. And I'd like to understand exactly what financial relationship exists between you and your son's household. I had used the same accountant for 20 years, a meticulous woman named Sandra Obi, who had done my taxes since I was still at the city, and who kept files the way a librarian keeps books, organized, cross-referenced, and permanent. I called her the same afternoon. I told her what had happened. I asked her to pull everything related to the $60,000 bank transfers, correspondence, any documentation of the gift. What Sandra found was something I hadn't fully processed at the time. The $60,000 I'd given Michael and Vanessa hadn't just gone toward the down payment on the Oakville house. Sandra showed me bank records and a chain of transfers I hadn't seen clearly before. A portion of the money had moved through their joint account and into a separate account in Vanessa's name alone, about 18 months after I'd given them the funds. The account had been opened shortly after their purchase. The transfers were small enough to avoid easy notice. Roughly $22,000, over the course of about 14 months, had been quietly moved into an account Michael didn't appear to know about. I sat in Sandra's office for a long time after she told me this. I thought about Michael's face at the Tim Hortons, that careful coached expression. I wondered how much of what he'd been telling me was Vanessa's script, and how much of it he genuinely believed. I wondered if he knew about the account. I decided, sitting there, that he probably didn't. That made it worse. Somehow. Not better. Reginald and Sandra worked together over the following 6 weeks. I didn't say a word to Michael or Vanessa. I kept calling ahead for Saturday visits, kept following the rules, kept arriving on time with my car parked on the street. Vanessa let me in for 2-hour windows, and I sat on their beige sectional and watched Noah do puzzles and told him about the birds at the feeder in my backyard, and I didn't let anything show on my face. Noah asked me once, during that period, why I looked sad. I told him I wasn't sad. I told him I was just thinking. About what? He asked. About how much I love you, I said. He accepted that with the matter-of-fact confidence of a 6-year-old who has never once doubted that he is loved, and went back to his puzzle. In the 7th week, Reginald told me we had enough. He had drafted a legal demand letter outlining the $60,000 gift now treated, under the circumstances, as a documented loan given the way funds had been redirected, and requesting full repayment. The letter also noted the ongoing pattern of restricted access and formally asserted my rights as a grandparent under Ontario family law, which does allow grandparents to apply to the court for access to a grandchild when that access is being unreasonably denied. The letter was careful and precise and not inflammatory. It was simply very, very clear. Sandra had also prepared a financial summary. Every transfer, every date, the account in Vanessa's name, the amounts. A clean, documented picture of what had happened to $22,000 of money I'd given to my son's family. I put both documents in a large brown envelope. I called Michael and asked if I could come by that Saturday, as usual. He said yes, that was fine. I drove to Oakville with the envelope on the passenger seat. Vanessa answered the door. She was wearing the careful smile she always wore when I arrived, the one that didn't quite reach her eyes. Noah was somewhere in the back of the house. I could hear him talking to himself the way he does when he's playing. I said I had something for Michael. She started to say something about how this wasn't a great time. Michael was watching the game, and I said, gently, that it would only take a moment. I asked her to get him. Michael came to the door. He saw the envelope. Something in his expression shifted. I handed it to him. He opened it there in the doorway, Vanessa standing just behind his shoulder, and he read the first document. I watched the color change in his face. Not guilt, not at first. Confusion. He read the second page. Then he looked up at me. Dad, what is this? It's a letter from my lawyer, I said, and a financial report from my accountant. I think you'll want to read both of them carefully, and then I think you'll want to have a conversation with Vanessa. He looked at her. She looked at the envelope. I don't know what he's told you, she started. Vanessa, I said quietly, the account is documented. The transfers are documented. All of it. I wasn't angry. I want to be clear about that. I was very calm, in the way you get calm, when you've been sitting with something for 7 weeks and you've decided exactly how you want to handle it. This isn't an attack. I'm not here to make a scene. I'm here because Michael deserves to know what's been happening and because I deserve to see my grandson. She didn't say anything after that. Michael stood in the doorway reading for a long time. Noah appeared at his side at some point, slipping under his arm the way children do, and looked up at me. Hi, Grandpa Walter, he said. Hi, buddy, I said. Michael looked at me over Noah's head. His expression was something I don't have a clean word for, a combination of embarrassed and betrayed and relieved, all at once, the face of a man who has just been handed the explanation for something that hadn't made sense for years. Come inside, Dad, he said. We sat at their kitchen table for 2 hours. Vanessa, at first, tried to explain the transfers as savings for Noah's education, as household management, as a misunderstanding, but the documentation was clear, and at a certain point she stopped explaining and just sat very quietly, which is what happens when a person runs out of a story. Michael called Reginald himself the following week, not as an adversary, as someone who wanted to understand his options. There were a lot of conversations after that, some of which I was part of, and many of which I wasn't. I don't want to summarize Michael's marriage for him. That's his story. What I can tell you is that 6 months later, they were separated, and I was picking Noah up every Saturday morning and taking him to the conservation area near my house in Hamilton, where we look for herons along the creek, which is something Diane used to love to do. Noah calls herons big gray birds, because that's what I called them the first time he asked, before I remembered the proper word, and I've never corrected him because I like it better. The $60,000 was eventually settled as part of the separation. Michael got the house, or rather the equity in it, after the mortgage. Vanessa moved back to her family's place in Burlington. The $18,000 that couldn't be fully documented was left as a loss. Reginald advised me it wasn't worth pursuing further, and I agreed. Some things cost what they cost. What I want to tell you, if you're a parent or grandparent sitting somewhere watching this and recognizing something in this story, is that what happened to me has a name. It's called financial control, and it's one of the oldest tools in the isolation playbook. You give someone close to you the impression that they owe you, that access to family is contingent on compliance, that love is a transaction. And the person on the receiving end, if they're the kind of person who doesn't want conflict, who trusts the people they love, who believes family means something that person will absorb a great deal before they understand what's being done to them. I'm not a confrontational man. I spent my career making calculations, checking load-bearing structures, making sure things that needed to hold would hold. I don't rush. I don't escalate unless I need to. But there is a difference between keeping the peace and accepting terms that were never fair to begin with. Grandparents have rights. Not in an abstract, sentimental way legally. Under Ontario family law, grandparents can petition the court for access to grandchildren when that access is being unreasonably withheld. I didn't know that before Reginald. I'm telling you now because maybe you don't know it either. Money given to family should be documented. Not because you don't trust them, because documentation protects everyone. It protects the relationship. It protects you if the relationship changes. A simple letter confirming the amount, the purpose, and whether it's a gift or a loan can make all the difference later. I learned that the expensive way, and if you are watching someone in your family being isolated, a mother being pushed out, a father being kept at arm's length, a grandparent following a laminated list of rules just to sit on a beige couch for 2 hours, say something. Not in a way that creates a bigger conflict, but say something. Because the person being isolated often can't see it clearly from inside. They're too busy following the rules. Last month, Noah lost his first tooth. He called me on the phone immediately afterward, while the gap was still bleeding a little, and he was so proud he could barely finish his sentences. I drove over and took a photo of him grinning his new gap-toothed grin, and I sent it to Michael, and I kept one for myself, and I put a copy in the frame on my kitchen windowsill next to the one of Diane holding him in the hospital the week she died. She would have been completely insufferable about that tooth. She would have called everyone she knew. She would have made a whole thing out of it. I like to think she heard him on the phone, wherever she is. I like to think she's still keeping track.